right, it is 1 o'clock on the East Coast, and we know that right now President Trump is set to meet with his national security team. That should be happening at any moment as Iran vows revenge. Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Sandra Smith in New York, and John, great to kick off this hour with you.
Good to be with you again after yesterday, Sandra. I'm John Roberts in Washington, and this is America Reports. Right now, we're monitoring what's going on in the skies over Doha, Qatar. Qatar had closed its airspace before loud explosions were heard. According to the Associated Press, Iran is claiming that it has launched an attack against the Al Udeid Air Base, the American air base there just outside of the capital city. It is the largest air base, American air base in the Middle East.
And we're going to dig into that in just a moment. We'll take it to the maps. Fox News team coverage begins right now. Rich Edson has the latest from the White House. Trey Yanks is standing by in Tel Aviv. We're going to begin, however, with Jennifer Griffin. She's live with breaking news at the Pentagon. Jennifer, what is the latest that we're learning out of Qatar at this hour?
Well, Sandra, we had reported about an hour ago that there were very serious intelligence warnings that Iran was planning a strike targeting U.S. air bases across the Middle East, especially looking with all eyes on Qatar tonight. Now we understand that the president of Iran has put out a statement describing the attack as having begun, and they are calling it the Annunciation of Victory. And he says that this is a righteous response to the U.S. strikes over the weekend. We know from Israeli sources that the Israelis believe that 6 ballistic missiles were fired from Iran. We've seen evidence of air defenses being fired off in Qatar. The skies over Qatar lit up earlier tonight with those air defense interceptor missiles. It's not clear whether they intercepted any of those missiles that apparently were fired from Iran. The intelligence that I had been reporting on earlier today suggested that either medium ballistic range missiles as well as short-range cruise missiles were suspected of being put into position and potentially targeting U.S. bases. We now know that the airspace over Al Udeid has been closed. That, as you mentioned, is the largest air base in the Middle East. Normally 10,000 U.S. troops are based there. Most likely they had been dispersed in the past week. Then we also have seen some reports of sirens in Kuwait at the air base there, as well as the airspace over the United Arab Emirates being closed, given the concerns over Iranian missiles and the potential for more Iranian attacks. We also know that in Iraq, where the U.S. also has a significant presence, that the sirens have sounded at the air base in Al-Assad in Iraq. So right now, all eyes on the Middle East. The Iranians said they would respond to the U.S. strikes this weekend. The U.S. military was prepared for that. They expected this. And right now we're watching as the air defense systems do what they do best.
Hey, Jen, it's John here. Apparently, Bahrain says that sirens are sounding there. They've told their citizens to take shelter. Iran's armed forces, according to Reuters, says that they will not leave any attack on Iran's territory unanswered under any circumstances. However, we've seen a lot of the outgoing fire coming from the Al Udeid Air Base area. We've seen explosions in the sky. We haven't seen any explosions on the ground. Does that mean that they intercepted all of the missiles, or too early to know?
It's too early to know, but certainly a good sign that those air defense interceptors are going up into the sky. We have not seen any explosions on the ground, so that's good news as of now, but certainly very, very tense at all of these bases across the Middle East. And Bahrain is, of course, home to the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet. We had reported earlier in the week, last week, that many of the U.S. Navy vessels had gone out to sea protectively, knowing that something like this could happen. The U.S. has been in a very strong defensive posture, knowing that Iran would likely respond to this weekend's attacks. So this is not a surprise to the U.S. military or to U.S. intelligence. This has been part of the preparations. They knew that the weekend's strikes would likely elicit this kind of response. What we do know is that Iran has tens of thousands of short-range missiles that they can fire, and it's just a few-minute flight across the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz to those bases where the U.S. is normally located. So again, the amount of time that it takes and the ability of Iran still, even after more than a week, 10 days of Israeli airstrikes, taking out nearly half, if not three-quarters of their missile launchers. They were looking at a lot of the ballistic missile launchers, but the short-range missiles, Iran has just thousands of those, and they can cause a lot of problems. Then, of course, Iran has, as we've seen, swarming drones and the ability to swarm drones. That is what they have provided to Russia in Ukraine. We've seen the development of drone warfare out there. And so those air defense systems can be overwhelmed. We've seen that in the past. But right now, it looks like we've seen the interceptor missiles fired up over Doha, Qatar, into the night sky, and no evidence yet that any of those missiles have landed on their targets.
Yeah, I mean, it's crossing over Reuters as well right now that the Qatar air defenses intercepted this missile attack on the U.S. military base there. Also crossing UAE airspace is currently closed based on flight paths and air traffic control audio that is coming in via flight radar. So a lot happening. And as this is happening, Jen, I should note that the security meeting at the White House in the Oval Office with President Trump was set to begin at just a few moments ago. We expect that meeting is probably happening right now. Do you expect anything to emerge from that, or do you think this will still be obviously a top secret, quiet meeting that we will not hear what comes from that in the coming minutes?
Well, it's hard to say at this point. It's clear the timing of that meeting. It may be no coincidence. Again, the intelligence picture was pretty clear earlier today amongst those that I was speaking to, both in the region as well as in Washington. And the U.S. military knew that the Iranians would respond. And so it is no surprise to the U.S. military or the commanders at U.S. Central Command and elsewhere that this was going to be the Iranian response. Now it's just a question of, to what degree, how many rounds is this going to be? Is this a one, they're firing off, it appears at this moment, given the air defense sirens that have gone off and the warnings at multiple places across 4 or 5 countries where the U.S. is based. Is this one round? Is it multiple? Will they be able to get off more missiles? Or is this a show of force, a symbolic firing of missiles that the U.S. anticipated that is for the Iranian leadership to show that they are still in control, still in power, that the Iranian regime is not on the verge of falling? That is really the concern, I think, for the Iranian regime tonight. They need to show that their own people, this is for domestic consumption as much as anything, to show that they are not on the verge of collapse following that very significant U.S. airstrike on their 3 top nuclear facilities this weekend.
All right, so let's take a look at this attack. 6 ballistic missiles, as we understand it, at this point. When you take a look back at Iran's response to the takeout of Qasem Soleimani, they fired 22 missiles in total. 17 of those were targeted at al-Assad. The fact that Iran just fired 6 and this attack was much bigger than taking out a single person, and the fact that the ballistic missile attacks against Israel seem to be coming either in 1s or 2s or very small groups, is that a suggestion that Iran's ability to counterattack is greatly diminished?
Well, it's certainly diminished in terms of the longer range ballistic missiles that could hit Israel. We've seen Israel take out many of those longer range mobile missile launchers. They say that they've taken out up to 2/3 of those launchers. But again, it only takes one ballistic missile to get through. And again, the Iranians have thousands of shorter range missiles, and all it takes, it's a much shorter flight to Qatar and to the UAE and to the Gulf states where the U.S. is based. And then, of course, the Iranians have many other weapons in their arsenal. They have anti-ship missiles. They have the ability to mine the Strait of Hormuz. I'm told that would probably be their last option, but if the regime really felt that it was threatened, but it would be very significant because it would disrupt all those the shipping lanes, and it would take, I'm told, about a week for the U.S. Navy to demine if they were to actually lay the mines in the Strait of Hormuz. But all of these things are on the table. I think, you could be seeing short-range missiles fired from barges in the Persian Gulf. That certainly is part of the Iranian playbook. We don't know at this point what was fired. Again, it's Israeli sources that are reporting that it was 6 ballistic missiles. Certainly, from looking at the skies over Qatar and the interceptors that were fired earlier, just within the last hour, we see no evidence that any of those ballistic missiles landed. But so hopefully they were all intercepted. But it is, as we've seen in the last few times that Iran has fired at Israel, it's easier to you can overwhelm air defense forces, particularly if it's a combination of drones. And the short flight pattern is really what has people worried. It's such a short distance between Iran and those bases in the Gulf states.
Jen, I'm just looking at a statement that is crossing the wire right now through Reuters. Iran's top security body tells Qatar this action does not pose any threat to our friendly and brotherly neighbor, Qatar, making it obviously very clear that this is a targeted attack on the U.S. base only, Jennifer.
Well, that suggests to me, and again, if the Israeli intelligence is correct and it's 6 ballistic missiles, those ballistic missiles would be GPS guided and they would know where the U.S. air base is, Al Udeid. It was surprising to me earlier today when we heard about the intelligence that Iran was planning to strike Qatar because of their close relationship and the mediating role, the important mediating role that Qatar has played between Iran, its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and others with Israel and the United States. So I would not expect for a willy-nilly raining of missiles down on the people of Qatar or the Qataris themselves. But the U.S. has a very large air base there, about 40 miles outside of Doha. That is well known. And then there's the U.S. Embassy, and the U.S. Embassy staff were told earlier today and just moments ago to shelter in place. So clearly the belief that the U.S. targets in Qatar were likely the target of this alleged Iranian strike.
All right, Jan, stand by with this.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.